I'm Scott Allen Miller, and I am here with the NTG Lab, Mango Lassi, and MangoCon to talk to you in an IT 101 session, nugget, whatever we're calling them. In this session, I've been asked to talk to you about what is IT. So this is about as basic as we can get in an IT 101 session. What is IT? This may seem like an incredibly rudimentary question. It may seem like everyone knows what IT is, but the reality is, if you ask different people in different areas what IT is, you're going to get a lot of different definitions. And it's also important to realize that IT doesn't have a really strict definition. The US government doesn't have a really strict definition. There isn't an industry definition. Universities and colleges do not really agree actually at all as to what the definition is. Different governments will not agree with the kind of generalizations that the US government tends to make. And people who work in the field are going to vary quite a bit from those groups. What I'm going to do today is try to present a definition or a description to you that helps you understand what IT is in a meaningful way so that you can actually take this and apply it to your career goals, your understanding of the career, the way that you approach the career. And I'm not here to necessarily define IT for everyone because there's not a standard, and it is a term that I find to be inaccurate at best. But what I want to do is create a new definition that you can use in a useful way so that we can discuss IT with each other within the industry. And of course, what that industry is partially what we're defining. So one of the first things about IT, we all know what it stands for, information technology. And this is actually a really terrible name for what we do. If we were to look at some other fields and talk about, say, engineering, we understand that what engineers do can be defined by a little bit of description. You have mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, they all do engineering. And the first word kind of helps define what kind of engineering. If we take that same thing and apply it to information technology, we get the idea that we are technologists, and this is wrong. If we were to work with other kinds of technology, such as video games, would we become video game technologists? No. The goal of IT is not technology. This is the flaw in the name. What IT is actually a business discipline, not a technology discipline. Now, it's true, we tend to work with technology, and a lot of us tend to come to the field because we fall in love with technology, or we find it very interesting, or we have an affinity for it. But it's not actually a field about technology. If we were to be able to do our jobs better without technology, we would do so, and that would be the correct thing to do, and we would not be changing fields. So I propose that we actually think of ourselves as something a little bit different. What we actually are is in the field of business infrastructure. Our purpose as a field is to work in the business in the same way that managers, CEOs, CFOs, and other departments are functionally part of businesses and organizations. We are as well. But we are on the infrastructure side. And specifically, if we really want to get into a closer definition, we can think of it as the information infrastructure side. This is to make sure that we don't get confused with groups who make our roads, build our buildings, bring in trains, or work with physical workflows and things of that nature. We don't want to be confused with people who build factories. We are the information infrastructure group within a business. So we think of ourselves within the context of business, and our job is delivering the actual infrastructure, the framework through which information is collected, is saved, is protected, is disseminated, is transferred, is communicated. We do all those things. And if that means we do it on paper, if that means we do it with pigeons, if that means we do it with computers, that's how we do it. The reality is 99.99999% of everything we do is going to be with computers and networks and technology. And we need to understand that technology, and that's why we come to this field. But we are not driven by the technology. The technology is a tool for us to enable business. Business is the context in which IT exists. Without business, there is no IT. So, this brings up some important questions. People who work in video games, making video games, for example, are they part of IT? Generally, we're going to say no. They're in video game creation. It's a similar field. We cover a lot of the same grounds, but they're not really IT. They don't have a business context. What about people who fix home computers? Again, not really IT. Some people may want to treat their homes like a business, in which case we could make a pretty good argument that the people who consult and oversee home computers and home networks could be in IT, but it's because they're applying a business IT discipline to another arena intentionally. So it's a little bit of a gray area we're stepping over. But generally, when we're talking about people who do non business technology functions, ones that don't think about the internal infrastructure or the information infrastructure of a business, they're actually a separate group. These are people who are actually focused on technology, not on the business. And an example of this that most everyone knows is the people who do what we call bench work. And there's a lot of different names for this. If you think IT is not well defined, bench work, unfortunately, is even less well defined. But the bench field includes people like Geek Squad at Best Buy, or the people who work at the desk at Staples, or the local Main Street computer fix-it shop, the people who build white box computers, often build video game rigs, fix broken computers, replace hard drives, do malware removal, and install applications for end users at a local store, or do online service for those kind of people. This is generally considered bench services. They are focused on the technology, they're driven by the technology, they work within a context of technology in a very physical way, typically, and they are not focused on business. Now, lots of businesses have bench departments that do physical work inside of them. These groups will often not know about the infrastructure. They may not care about the infrastructure. It's not the way that they view the world, and they will function much like those technology groups at a Best Buy, for example. So it's very important because this is an area where we very carefully have to separate the two, because it is so often by casual observers on the outside mixed together. Because IT, real IT, business information infrastructure, is something that is not well understood outside of the field. It's not even that well understood inside the field. So for outsiders, BII is a really complex thing. What exactly is business information infrastructure? Well, it's systems and networks and databases and reliability and redundancy and a whole bunch of things that are very, very complicated. It's not something we can easily convey to people that we do. Because of this, the bench field, which also works with computers, is very visible and very easy to understand. We install applications, we put in a new hard drive. It's things that consumers use and do all the time. So because of this, people tend to apply their knowledge of bench services to IT and confuse the two. This then carries over to a lot of people who go into IT thinking it's related to bench services. This goes even a step farther, and a lot of companies that want to associate themselves with IT mix the two together and start doing things like using the bench certification, the CompTIA A+, and using it for what they call IT professionals. This gets even more confusing. And then, of course, colleges and universities don't look into the field in the way that they should, and also confuse this. And so actually turn out people who have gone through years of study, quite often blending the two, or maybe even missing business information infrastructure completely. So this is a difficult thing to discuss, and it's very difficult for people to separate. And that's why I really like using the term business information infrastructure, to make sure that we know what we're talking about, and it provides a context for that discussion. Yes, we know that we're going to be called IT to everyone else, and that's fine. People are used to that term. It has stuck now for a couple decades. It's probably not going to go anywhere, but it's very, very critical that we understand that it is wrong and not useful to try to define IT in the way that people who don't know what we do think it is applied. We can go and talk to those people, but that's not good for us. We as an industry have to understand what it is we do and what makes us different than the people who do bench services or whatever. This is, as you approach a career, very, very critical. If you want to get to those upper echelons of information technology, you're not going to be able to do so if you think of yourself as a bench services person with an IT label slapped on. It's simply not going to work. So defining what we do, very, very important in creating a healthy working career structure for ourselves. So taking this, what we want to remember is that IT always operates within the context of business. We always think about how we impact the business, whether that's return on long-term investments, total cost of ownership, thinking about the impact of our decisions to the bottom line of the company. And not always do we have access to that information, but we need to be thinking about it in that context. Very often you will meet people or talk to other IT professionals who are lacking that context, very often because they went through training and certification, possibly university training, that encourage them to think of themselves as just technologists and to forget or to completely ignore the fact that they are not technologists, that is not their goal, that they function within the context of a business. So I encourage you, as you begin to go down your path of an IT career, some of you are just starting, some of you have been in it for decades, but to begin to think about how IT is part of the business and part of the business of business. Not just a member of the business community within your organization, but actually part of the same type of structure that the CEO is. And to think of yourselves in that context. How do you relate to the business that you are supporting, and how everything you do, every decision that you make, reflect the business. And by doing so, I think you will find that you are able to have a much more rewarding and successful career and provide a great deal better value to the organizations that you were brought in to support. Now, I know that's a very, very difficult conversation to have and to internalize, so I don't have simple answers for you, but I hope that this provides you with a means of thinking about what exactly is IT. And I'm sure that we're going to have more sessions talking more in depth about parts of IT, what IT does within a business more specifically, and how to think about it more thoroughly. But this is a beginning framework for understanding what IT is. So thank you for joining us. I'm Scott Allen Miller with the NTG Lab. We are an IT think tank within the SMB industry, and you can find more about what we do at mangolossy.it, a community for IT professionals, and you can see me and others speak at our conference, mangocon.it, where the Mangolossy IT community gets together in person and have sessions kind of like these. So thank you for joining us.